Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Ravi Sharma, and I'm the National Chapter's representative and member of the board for PanIIT USA. On behalf of PanIIT USA, it is an honor for me to welcome you to this webinar session today. Many of our alumni, the graduates of IITs, have founded or co-founded highly successful companies and have made a significant impact in Silicon Valley and across the world. Without a doubt, IIT alumni are contributing significantly to technology and startups everywhere. IIT alumni have been pivotal in shaping the startup landscape across multiple sectors, including healthcare, finance, technology, and much more. Many major companies around the world have been founded or co-founded by IIT alumni. In the US, you have Sun Microsystems, Juniper Networks, Nutanix, Palo Alto Networks, and Zscaler, Rubrik, or in India, companies like Infosys, NIIT, Flipkart, Ola Cabs, Zomato, and I could go on, Swiggy, Vigo, InMobi, and so forth. Now, venture capital has played a crucial role in the success of many of these companies that were once startups. But now, as we navigate the challenges of an increasingly uncertain world, influenced and driven by artificial intelligence, the subject for today's webinar is very apt for this audience. For example, what is the right perspective to look at things in this new era? How do you make decisions in an uncertain, disrupted world? And how are the VCs thinking about all of this? There could not be a better speaker or speakers and experts to invite to our forum to talk about this and discuss this with all of us than Professor Ilya and Alex. Professor Ilya Strebulaev is the foremost academic expert on venture capital, as well as private equity, innovation, and financial decision-making. He's the founder of the Venture Capital Initiative and a tenured chaired professor of finance and private equity at Stanford University's Graduate School of Business. Professor Ilya teaches a popular class on venture capital at Stanford. His research has been widely published in leading academic journals and featured in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Bloomberg, and Harvard Business Review. Professor Ilya frequently leads workshops and executive sessions for senior business and government leaders around the world, and he has consulted for companies and investors on corporate innovation and the venture industry trends. In 2023, Professor Ilya was named a top voice on LinkedIn. Professor Ilya's upcoming book, which he co-authored with Alex, who happens to be with us today as well, is being released very soon. I believe it is May 21st, about 10 days from now. It is filled with many entertaining stories and uncommon insights, and I encourage you to consider pre-ordering your copy if you would like. I've asked Professor Ilya to give us a bit of a sneak peek into his book as he delivers his talk today. We are also fortunate to have Professor Ilya's co-author, as I mentioned, Alex Dang, with us today. Alex is a former partner at McKinsey, and he has had several leadership roles at Amazon, AWS, and we are very lucky and fortunate to have you, Alex. Thank you for joining us. There will be a live Q&A session after the talk portion of the webinar today. So please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A window at any time. Please limit yourself to one question if possible, if you have too many questions. We do recognize that the timing for this session is not very convenient for our alumni in India and some other parts of the world. This session is, however, being recorded and will be made available to you to watch later. You can go to iit.org or the PanIIT USA YouTube channel to watch the recordings of these webinars. With that, please welcome Professor Ilya and Alex. Professor Ilya, thank you so much. And Alex, thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk with us today. And we know that you're very busy with the launch of your book. Please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ravi. Thank you for such a warm welcome and introduction. It's really great to be here. It's a particular pleasure to be here. I have been at Stanford for about 20 years. I've been teaching thousands of students. I developed a venture capital class that now become one of the most popular classes at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. And hundreds of those students went on to found venture-backed companies or became venture capitalists themselves. And I'm very proud to tell you that many of those students are either from India or of Indian origin. And many of them became very close friends. Many of them, after they graduated and founded companies, I became their advisor, their investor, their friend. And many of them became venture capitalists. And I became their investor, limited partner, and their advisor as well. So it's a particular great pleasure to be here. Thank you, Ravi, again for the invitation. So let me share my slides. Hopefully that everybody see the slides. Now, first of all, as Ravi mentioned, Alex and I wrote the book, The Venture Mindset, that is coming out in 10 days. In fact, everybody is actively pre-ordering this in the US on Amazon, in the UK or on Amazon. I believe it's also available on Kindle in India, and will be available everywhere else in English and subsequently in other languages as well. The reason we really wrote this book is because we care a lot about impact. I have been teaching, as I mentioned, at Stanford for 20 years. But you know, as a Stanford professor, you can have an impact on the students who took your class, such as Alex. But even many Stanford students could not take my class. Last year, 240 students were on the wait list for my class at Stanford. And the idea behind writing the book was to have an impact on those founders in the US, but also really around the globe, who would like to benefit from the venture mindset, but also for those who work in large companies. Because one of the insights I had after doing research on how venture capitalists make decisions for 20 years is that these venture capitalists use specific principles that are very unusual, very non-standard compared to principles used by everybody else, let's say in traditional large companies. And that executives in large companies, employees of large companies can use the venture mindset principles to improve their future, to improve the outcomes for their companies, but also for themselves. So that was really the idea. We wrote the venture mindset. And as Ravi said, today we'll provide you with a little bit of insights, a little bit of sneak peek on the book, but really I will try to be as, Alex and I will try to be as practical as possible. Now, Ravi mentioned a number of companies that were venture-backed, but many people don't realize the importance of venture capital. Here's the US data. My team at Stanford, and I founded the Venture Capital Initiative at Stanford, and I went and analyzed every single company that went public in the United States in the last 50 years. Okay, think about this. There are thousands of them, a lot of work involved. And for every single one of them, we identified who was their primary investor before they went public. And it turns out that every second company in the US that went public in the last 50 plus years was venture-backed. And out of every dollar that is spent on research and development by all these public companies today, 92 cents is spent by companies that were venture-backed. So these companies, venture-backed companies, and the venture capital industry is in really behind the growth engine of the American economy. And in fact, in my other piece of research, I show that there's a causality link, meaning that had there been no venture capital industry in the US, many of these companies that we know today, Apple, Microsoft, Netflix, NVIDIA, Airbnb, Uber, and many others would not have existed or achieved scale had there been no venture capital industry. And it turns out to be that the venture capital industry is not just important for impact, but also it is very, very different from how it is structured, how it makes decisions, and the principles that it follows.
More importantly, these venture capitalists brought the way that companies make decisions. Many of VCs were board members in venture-backed companies. And as a result, what we studied, that many companies that Ilya just mentioned, Amazon, Google, NVIDIA, Microsoft, Apple, they all inherited many of the venture mindset principles in the way they make decisions today.
And these companies, if you look at, let's say, top 10 companies in the US, according to market capitalization, 6, 7, or 8 companies, depending on the durations of the market every day, are venture-backed. Just think about this, okay? Those are now almost 90% of the market cap in the US. Now, if you look at the founders that founded those venture-backed companies, and this is the founders of all the successful venture-backed companies, the unicorns that I study. And in fact, to celebrate the book launch, what we did is we published a unicorn report that summarized all the data about unicorns that my team analyzed for the past many, many years. But here's one interesting fact, is that if you study, if you look at every single founder of an American venture-backed unicorn, then more than 44%, so 44.5% to be precise, of these unicorn founders are born outside the United States. And I'm sure you would enjoy hearing that 90 founders of American venture-backed companies came from India. And this is the analysis. So as I mentioned, we analyze every single founder of American unicorns. And again, there are thousands of them. We analyzed many things about them, but also their educational background. And this shows you best universities in India and by the number of US unicorn founders that they produced and also what they studied. Not surprisingly, computer science or engineering. And I'm pretty sure, Ravi, that many participants here can see the universities, the colleges that they studied in, okay, in India. So when I showed this slide to my students from India at Stanford, they really loved seeing this slide. Okay, and so this is why we really wrote the book. And I already mentioned the unicorn report that we just published, like 200 pages, that summarize all these facts. I just mentioned 2, but of course, many, many more facts that really many founders think it was going to help them to become a unicorn founder. And of course, investors are really eager to dive into this unicorn report as well. Okay, let me go into the venture mindset now. What we've discovered are the 9 key principles behind the venture mindset. You see them here on the screen. I will not have time to go over, of course, all of them in today's talk, but we'll try to go into some of them today. And what Alex and I will try to do is to provide examples that are useful both for founders by utilizing these principles, but also for those who work in large companies. So let's start. Principle number 1, and I'm going to use an American baseball analogy. Hopefully everybody will know this analogy. Home runs matter, strikeouts don't. So home runs in baseball is something that everybody is waiting for, okay? This is what makes you win the match. And home runs matter in venture capital. Here is based on my data. If you look at typical 20 venture bets by venture capitalists, then there will be a lot of strikeouts or a lot of failures. Between 15 and 16, companies fail, startups fail. Several will return you what we call 2 to 4x, meaning for each dollar of investment, you will get $2, $3, $4 back, which is an okay return. But most venture capitalists think it's a pretty bad, low quality return because it doesn't help them to cover the losses. And then there will be this home run. And to remember the home run, what a home run is, just think about 100x, which means that for each dollar of investment, venture capitalists expect to get in a home run at least $100 back. And that is a very unusual philosophy, a very unusual industry. Because if you happen to work in a large company, I don't think that you expect home runs. You would love to have home runs, but actually the business model and the decision-making process is not about getting home runs. It turns out that all the ideas, all the decisions that venture capitalists make is all about trying to increase access to home runs, increase the probability of identifying a home run early on, backing the home run, and increasing the probability that your startup will be a home run. Okay. Let me, for example, give evidence from one of my friends who is a senior partner at Andreessen Horowitz. In fact, he's now in charge of the new AI fund, Alex Rampell. And he also loves creating quotes. So here's one of his quotes. He says, errors of omission are much bigger than errors of commission, which means that strikeouts don't matter. You invest, you lose, but if you miss something that turns out to be a great, great startup, that is a much bigger. Another famous venture capitalist, a partner at Benchmark, Bill Gurley, saying exactly the same. He says, if you invest in something that doesn't work, you lose 1x your money. And if you miss Google, you lose 10,000x your money. It turns out that both Alex and Bill, but most other venture capitalists who follow the venture mindset, they really change their approach to how they analyze everything, from the space to specific startups to founders to business model, in order to increase the probability of a home run. What is really interesting is that the same is true for companies that, as Alex mentioned, used to be venture-backed and now retain their venture mindset. Just two examples. One is Amazon. Jeff Bezos, the founder and the former CEO of Amazon, liked saying, everything needs to scale, including the size of your failed experiments. Okay? Sounds unusual from the CEO, and try to find the CEO of a traditional company that will say great things about failed experiments. Now, Alex, after he graduated from the GSB, from my class, from Stanford, he went on and worked at Amazon. So, Alex, maybe you can share some of the failed experiments that you worked at.
Of course, and just making sure that we're in the same page in terms of that this approach means counterintuitive, but now you see the point. It's all about the home runs. What Jeff and his leadership team were looking for are home runs, truly big wins. Think of Fire Phone, which was a big failure, but at the same time, you should remember AWS, the team that I worked for, AWS AI ML team. Amazon Web Services is now the key component of Amazon's business, or advertising business, which supports the whole e-commerce machine. So to some extent, Amazon today is an innovation machine. And the way that the innovation machine works, it hunts for home runs. More importantly, it is part of Amazon's culture today. I personally, in my office, kept all my failed press releases of the products which we launched or tried to launch on the wall, right next to big wins. And the reason for that is to signal to the team that it is fine to fail. There is a very particular way how to fail, and we talk more about this in the book. Say you don't have to bet the farm on a new initiative, but the key and true important thing is that if you do not fail, it means that you may lose a chance to invest in a home run. And another company from a completely different industry, which is Netflix, and the quote will be shown on the screen immediately, that the cancel rate or the failed experiments within Netflix also should be high. Actually, the CEO and the founder insisted that if the cancel rate is too low, if all of the experiments are so successful, that's actually a very bad sign. To anyone within the corporate setting, this should be kind of a shock. Really? So you should actually expect failures. And if you do not see them that often, then something is wrong within the business model.
And to give you two examples of how these home runs work, let me just show you two industries in the US, but I'm sure you can find similar examples elsewhere. Example on the left is about coffee. So Starbucks has around 40% of all coffee shops in the US. And then the rest doesn't really matter much as a result of this. By the way, notice that Starbucks was a venture-backed company, which means that venture capitalists don't really invest just in tech business that most people think. They truly invest in businesses that change the business model of the industry, offering a new business model. Obviously, Starbucks was one of those changing industry startups. And then, of course, you've heard about Uber. If you're in India, maybe you've never heard of Lyft. But Uber is a ride-sharing service, the most popular in the US, has around 65–75% of the market. The second player in the ride-sharing market in the US is Lyft. Now, when I work with, we give a lot of sessions to the C-suite and senior executives in large American companies. And whenever we do the session, we ask them, so name me number one ride-sharing app in the US. Well, everybody says Uber. Name me number two ride-sharing app in the US, and everybody says Lyft. Name me number three ride-sharing app in the US. Complete dead silence. Nobody can name the third because either they don't exist, or they die overnight, or they don't really matter. And I'm pretty sure that wherever you are, it is exactly the same. As I tell my students, for each Uber, there is Lyft, but that's that. This is also what I call the land of the best and the rest. And especially in today's environment, in the venture capital spaces, that is more and more the case, which is there's going to be a big winner in every single space. There's going to be a runner-up, and kind of nothing else matters. So if you would like to become a startup founder, or really if you're pursuing a very interesting project in a large company, then pay attention to this. Now, how this approach, this principle of home runs, should apply to large organizations, not just small startups or venture capital firms. If you represent a large organization, that perhaps, I'm going to exaggerate maybe a little bit, this perhaps the single most important slide that you will see tonight, okay? And that is the pyramid or a portfolio. I believe that every single organization should be viewed as a portfolio of bets. So whenever I talk to the CEOs of large companies, I tell them, think about your company, not as having this product or that product, but you have a portfolio of bets. Some of those bets are materialized and, generating a lot of cash for you today. That's core. Some of those bets are adjacent, meaning that they are experiments, but within the same business model, within the same product. And then there are new bets or disrupt, something that can completely disrupt your industry, your space, and maybe doesn't have a direct relationship with the run, with the core of your organization right now. And Alex already provided a couple of examples on Amazon. And Alex, maybe you would like to very briefly, because we know Amazon pretty well, briefly tell us about the core, adjacent, and new in Amazon.
Totally. And again, if you're thinking about the portfolio, it has to be a portfolio of different bets. And some of them will improve the core business of your company. Think of running thousands A/B tests, and we used to have a platform called WebLab to do that. Or launching a free one-day or same-day delivery. That's part of your day-to-day business. And innovation will happen there. And more importantly, according to the size of the pyramid, you can see that that's foundational. And it is foundational. And that 60 to 70% of your resources, teams will be dedicated to improving your core. However, what makes Amazon unique is that they constantly invest in adjacent businesses, as well as Google and many other technology-driven corporations. It could be a Prime book box for kids, the initiative that I was part of, or Amazon Personalize, if you think about the personalization engine, or Prime Samples, the idea, how can we translate the sampling experience in your grocery store and translate that into your online experience? But also what makes especially unique about Amazon is that they constantly make extra risky bets. And I would use the word risky here to highlight that in some cases, that would be truly big failures. AWS, Alexa, or Fire Phone would be transformational. And they are. It takes time to demonstrate the impact. It will not happen overnight. It may not happen even in 1, 2, 3 years, similar to how startups would not become unicorns immediately. It will take time for a startup to go and become a unicorn and then IPO or being sold to a strategic investor. But what is even more important than many of these bets within the core, adjacent or new, disruptive ideas will fail. And that is absolutely totally fine. So there is a question that I can see from Sukhwinder, and I think, Ilya, we may want to answer it now, is that that's all good about the large-scale corporations. But what about small startups? Can they take such risks? So first of all, I think I had to convince as a McKinsey partner that as a big corporation, you have resources to play this game many, many, many times. And you should do so. You should make many small bets. Some of them must be risky to win big. For a startup, it's all about pivoting. It's running experiments to find your product market fit. Which marketing technique would work? Which customer segment will respond better to your product offering? What would be the channel partner that would make you successful? All of these smaller scale experiments will also matter. And some of them may become the one that will become your product market fit and may make you a unicorn pretty soon.
Let me add, Sukhwinder's question, I think, is very important. Sukhwinder is asking really whether a small seed-based startup have enough resources to take on risk, high risk. So here would be my really answer, is that depends on your ambitions and aspirations. That also depends on whether you would like to get angel and specifically venture-backed money. There are hundreds of thousands of startups every single year in the US, in India, and elsewhere around the world. And most of them are risky, but they do not have ambitions to scale very highly. And then I think they should not be taking too much risk. But if you have an ambition to scale fast, especially raise venture-backed money, you will not be able to do so without taking a lot of risk. So venture capitalists, in fact, think of themselves as risk reduction engineers, which is they try to ensure that they minimize risk in some domains. For example, they will think about whether your startup resolved the technology risk or whether they are certain that the market is large enough or they can trust the founders and so on. But they also know that in order to scale fast, you have to take fast risk. To take a lot of risk. So I would say that if you plan to take on venture money, and at the same time, you don't believe that you can either for financial reasons or psychological reasons take a lot of risk, then I think venture capitalists will see this through right away and likely will be skeptical about making such a founder. So my suggestion is to think carefully about your attitude towards risk and whether you have ambitions to scale fast. So that was Sukhwinder. Thank you so much. That will be a great question. And again, just to remind you, we will answer a lot of questions after our session, towards the end of our session. So please, and I already see some interesting questions in the chat. We will try to get to those questions. There's something else. There's a tool that venture capitalists use that I've discovered that I think helpful to use for everybody. If you're a venture capitalist or an investor, you absolutely must. but also if you're an executive in a large company, but also if you're a founder or indeed any employee in a large company. The tool is called Anti-Portfolio. Let us give an example first. In Silicon Valley, there's a very well-known firm called Bessemer Venture Partners, BVP. And Dave Cohen is a partner there. And what he published on the BVP website, you can go there and check, is their anti-portfolio. What is anti-portfolio? Effectively, the companies that Bessemer had access to and for whatever reason missed, decided not to invest. Nowadays, in fact, I work with a lot of large venture capital firms to improve their decision-making. And very often, the very first thing I do is, let's look at your anti-portfolio. And if your anti-portfolio performs better than your portfolio, then I think you can ask a question, well, why that is the case, okay? And there are many ways to analyze this. But for whatever you do, my practical trick for you is try to think about your anti-portfolio. Actions that you had a chance to take and you did not take. Projects you had a chance to invest and you did not invest. Whether they were more successful and why. And I think that is what the Venture Minds principle will tell you. Do it frequently. And then you can learn from the actions that you did not take, but maybe should have taken. Okay. Let's move to the next principle. The next principle is getting outside of the four walls. And let me start with a very simple question. Where do you find VCs more often? In the shiny office or outside the office, say in a coffee shop? It turns out that venture capitalists don't like their offices very much. They typically in an office 1 day a week for their Monday partner meetings, but the rest of the day they travel, they go to coffee shops, they go to various industry events. They try to get outside the four walls. And that is an important principle. I've done a lot of research about this principle. For example, I compared the LinkedIn connections of venture capitalists and LinkedIn connections of corporate innovators. VCs tend to have just more connections. But even more importantly, their connections are more varied, more diversified, coming from different industries, from small companies, large companies, from different universities. And this way, they have a more chance to get diversified, to source their deals, to source ideas. When I look at corporate innovators, they're just not smaller connections, but they're more, coming from less diversified networks. Maybe from their parent company where they work right now, or from the previous company they worked, or from whatever college they studied. So one goal right now is, just don't do it now, do it after the session. Go to your LinkedIn if you have a LinkedIn and analyze your LinkedIn. Do you have mostly people whom you know from your employer? Do you happen mostly people whom you know from your college? How did you meet those people? And I think that's very important. Try to think about how can I meaningfully diversify my network? Because this will generate serendipitous ideas, serendipitous encounters, and a lot of opportunities.
One specific idea, guys, is just if you have time this weekend, send a note or a few to your former professors. That's what I did the other day when I got in touch with Ilya, and the book is a result of that, almost like a serendipitous connection. So I think you can search and proactively reach out to diversify your network and learn more about the new industry and new technologies.
And let's look at my research, where I asked a question about, so where do all these startup investments originate for venture capitalists? It turns out from everywhere, from many places. A third deals come from professional networks. So for example, professor introducing a startup to a venture capitalist. A third, they're proactively self-generated. This really means that venture capitalists study themselves the space, seek actively every single founder. Some of them referred by other investors, some of them referred by portfolio companies. So here is, by the way, a specific piece of advice for those who are founders in the audience and would like to attract venture capitalists. What I found out is that referring by other investors is not that successful unless that investor who is referring you is already investing in your startup. So if an investor comes to you and says, Alex or Ravi, I'm not interested in your startup, but let me introduce you to that kind of investor. Okay, be very careful. Seems like a very friendly gesture, and maybe it is, but be a bit wary because that might send the wrong signal. However, if you're introduced through a portfolio company founder, so that the founder, the CEO, the executive team member of a portfolio company of that investor, then it's guaranteed that the investor will take it seriously, will meet you, will look at your pitch. And the ideal introduction is like the CEO of a portfolio company tells VC, you know what, here's the buddy of mine, or here's the guy whom I met, and I think this is really interesting startup. I can see this, okay? The venture capitalist will take this. So therefore, a trick is a shortcut. Try to identify the venture capitalist through his or her portfolio companies. There is another way that venture capitalists find startups is that startups find them. And it's called inbound from management. Or indeed, it's called cold calls or cold emails, okay? And are cold emails, cold calls effective? If you talk to venture capitalists, they will tell you, don't bother. We don't respond to cold emails. So I decided to check that. And my former student, Will Gurnall, who's now a professor as well, several years ago, we checked this in a very unusual experiment. We sent 80,000 emails to real venture capitalists in the United States. But we sent emails from fake founders of fake companies. Here's an example of that email. It's a person that doesn't exist. Of course, the venture capitalists do not know about this. Of a startup that doesn't exist, but we created the startups. We created their web pages. We created the founders, their social media presence, and so on and so forth. And we spent quite a bit of time on trying to analyze how this cold email should be written. So they are short, they're effective, they describe the pain points, they try to bypass the red flags. And we asked the question, what was the response rate? Now, by the response rate, I mean positive response rate. So response rate, let's meet for coffee. Can we get on Zoom chat? Here's the introduction to my partner who would like to meet you. Can you please send me the pitch deck? Can you please answer the 3 following questions, and so on and so forth. So again, when I talked to venture capitalist friend of mine, they told me, Ilya, don't do it. You will get exactly 0 responses. So here's the result. The result can be summarized in one line. For VCs, every email counts. The positive response rate was between 8 and 15%. So for the startup that turned out to be the least popular, let's put it this way, among VCs, the least successful, 8 VCs responded. For the most successful startup, 15% responded. That's enormously high response rate. So what is the lesson? If you're a founder, and I still would recommend you to find a warm introduction. But if you can't, cold emails work. Of course, you have to craft that cold email very carefully. And but cold emails work, and I think that is a very useful finding that many startup founders, now having looked through my research, decide to use. Both that they should not be afraid of cold calls, and also it's helpful how you can craft those emails. Okay? There is another principle of the venture mindset that I think is very important, and it's called prepare your mind. Now, this is what venture capitalists do, and this is what, in my opinion, founders absolutely must do, and the executives in large companies also should do. What do you mean by prepare your mind? Let me give you a story. This is a typical story, but I think it's very powerful nevertheless. Let me take you back to 2007. The first iPhone was released, was announced, but not yet released. And file sharing was not yet possible. But the idea of file sharing was out there. In fact, in July 2007, a tech website, Mashable, published a list of like 80 plus startups that were working on what was called back then file hosting. And many VCs thought that was a great space. One of them was Samir Gandhi, who was a partner at Sequoia, a famous venture capital firm at the time. And he and his partners also thought that was a great space. So here's how Samir approached this. First, he spent 6 months learning about the space. He met every single startup he knew at the space. He tried to understand the business model, the technology, the applications, all the cranes and nooks. And he did not make an investment. And then one day he met 2 founders who actually did not have the money. They didn't develop anything. They, in fact, had to take a Greyhound bus. If you live in the US, you know what this is, to save money, to travel across the country. And he met them serendipitously. And then they were introduced to other partners of his. And in minutes, he decided to meet with them again and then invest in them. And this way, he invested, and Sequoia became the first investor in what turned out to be an amazing startup, Dropbox. That is now, I think, many people, at least in the US, associate with file sharing. Why? Because he was prepared. As he said to me, I realized in 30 minutes that of all the companies that I had seen, and again, he saw like 50 plus, this was the one that he said I actually felt was the one to invest in, because every single time he met with startups, he thought, I know more about this space than they. But here, I met the guys who actually did not do anything, but they know about the space more than me. And I think that is a very, very powerful message. So, lesson for founders here. I'm very often asked this, like, I have like 30-second or 60-second elevator pitch to a VC. What should I say? Okay, here's my lesson. If you're a founder, you're talking to an investor, your task is not to convince the investor to invest in you in 60 seconds. Your task is to convince the investor to continue talking to you again, to want to meet with you again. So you should tell them something to surprise them, some fact about the space that likely they will not know, or very deep fact that they will be surprised. They would like to learn more about this. Okay? So this is something that I think works for many, many former students of mine who seek venture money. And yes, Dropbox deal became, I think, dollar per dollar, one of the most successful Sequoia Capital's deals ever. Let me move to the next principle that I think is very useful, and that's principle say no 100 times. So here's from my research. For every single deal that venture capitalists make, they say no, they bypass more than 100 deals. So the odds are against the founders, okay? But you can increase the odds if you're a founder. And if you're in a large corporation, you can increase the odds of investing in the right startup as well, or in the right internal project. So here is the trick that VCs use to make this this journey through their deal funnel very efficient. They separate the startups at the different layers of the funnel into what we call with Alex fast mode and slow mode. And in the fast mode, their goal is to basically get rid of 9 out of 10 startups. And in the slow mode, their task is to get rid of 9 out of 10 more startups. What is really crucial, and what we've discovered in research, is that the way venture capitalists make decisions is really, really different in the fast mode and slow mode. So different that we actually called it fast lane and slow lane. Okay? What is fast lane? Fast lane is VCs don't have time to go and dive into startup and spend hours trying to analyze you. They will ask a question. Why do I not want to invest in you? And that's called red flag approach. So effectively, their goal is to find one reason not to continue the conversation. And you have to be successful as a founder to bypass the stage to meet all their red flags, so to say. Okay, writing this book, Alex and I did a lot of cool research. But one specific cool piece of research was we watched Shark Tank, a show in the US where founders meet sharks or angel investors or venture investors. By the way, in Canada, it's known as Dragon's Den. So there are dragons. Why did we watch all this Shark Tanks, Dragon's Den shows? We wanted to identify how investors react to the questions that they ask founders. And this is what we found. A question is asked, a question is answered, and then you can see that if it raises the red flag, the investor immediately loses interest. Immediately. You can see this on the face. That means that startup, that founder did not pass the fast lane. And of course, then there will be no slow lane. So what are the fast lane red flags before you go into the slow lane? And the slow lane, of course, is a very, very careful due diligence where VCs ask a question, why are we anxious to invest? Or as my co-teacher Brian Jacobs likes saying, why are we greedy to invest? Okay. So what is the fast lane tricks or the most important red flags? There are two. The first one is about the team. You, as the founder, absolutely must convince the venture capitalist that you are the right person or the right team. This is called founder to product fit, founder to market fit. Without this, the venture capitalist will not continue the conversation. Another one, you have to convince the VC that the market is large enough. If the market is very small, the VCs will not continue the conversation. Okay, so we'll talk about the team, and this leads me to another principle about bet on the jockey. I can tell that Alex and I lead a lot of sessions to large companies, to the executives in large companies, and I think kind of people will say, yeah, our employees are very important, but then we find out that when decisions are made, the decisions are made about projects, not based on the employees.
Just think about a very traditional process of approving a business plan or the business idea. Where do people start? Majority of corporations that I served as an advisor, they would start with a business plan. They will go into financial modeling. They will challenge every single assumption. And after the project is approved, and everyone would agree that that makes sense, only after that, the leader or the team will be hired. How strikingly different this whole approach is from how VCs and the startup world operates. And probably that could be one of the reasons why startups and VCs are way better in finding and funding truly innovative ideas.
And the jockey, important enough, is not only the founders, because many founders think, well, it's about me or about my co-founder. Venture capitalists really care a lot about the team. So many VCs, in fact, will not invest in those only founders. They will invest only their full-time team members, and they demand talking to them and analyzing their strengths. Again, it doesn't mean that the horse is unimportant, the business model, the product, the technology, the market. But as one of my favorite VCs tells me, ideas are overrated. It's all about who is going to execute those ideas. And indeed, if you look at my research, half of the employees will not even, half of the VCs will not even invest at all if they don't believe in the team. They will not even consider the investments. So here is a story about this, which I like. And again, in our book, Alex and I give a lot of stories. But every single story we give, the reason we give is not just because it's fun, but because it's instructive, because it's a pattern. Okay, it's a typical story. So meet Andrew Bracher, who is a partner at Accel. Accel is another storied venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. And about 15 years ago, Andrew Bracher at Accel and other investors invested in a gaming company called Tiny Speck. You might never have heard about this company. The two founders, there was a team, it was a gaming company. Tiny Speck developed a game called Glitch. And my guess is that even if you are in the gaming world, maybe you've never heard of Glitch. Because when Glitch was released after months of working on the game, it was glitchy. And it didn't have good reviews. It didn't generate a lot of interest on behalf of the players. And very soon the founders decided, oh, well, it's time to quit. It's time to shut the doors. However, they still had $5 million in the bank. So one day, Andrew Bracher and other investors are getting an email from the founder of Tiny Speck that Tiny Speck is no more. It's a very sad day. Glitch is no more. But we have $5 million, so we're going to wire you the money tomorrow. What is really amazing is that to look at the investment memo that Andrew Bracher wrote to convince his partners at Accel to invest in Tiny Speck. And this is what Andrew Bracher said. Tiny Speck is still primarily a team bet. Notice, by the way, that he says team, not founder. They have failed with one another, succeeded with one another, and everything in between. What Andrew Bracher did is he refused to take money back. What he said to the founders of Tiny Speck, you know what, founders, we invested because of you, because of your team. Just, you have the money, try to pivot. And pivot they did. While developing this glitch, Tiny Speck employees developed a new communications tool to make communications between them more efficient, more effective. And they decided, that's cool, communication tool. We have not seen this around. You know what? Let's offer this to other companies. And they did. And this is how Slack, that I'm pretty sure many of you use these days, was born. And of course, that was a very great investment for Accel. But now think about whether this would have happened in your organization. The project is failing. Let's try to save money. And of course, Slack would never have been born. So that, I think, is the difference between betting on the jockey versus betting on the horse. Let's talk briefly about another principle that I believe is particularly important, not just for venture capitalists, but for large companies, but also for founders. And the principle is called double down or quit. So first of all, let me step back and tell you that most venture-backed companies have to raise money again and again and again. On average, a unicorn in the United States raises 6.5 rounds of venture funding. And every single time an investor has to decide whether to back this startup with more money by doubling down, or deciding, you know what, it's time to quit. We're not going to invest anymore in this startup. And that is a non-trivial decision. And I think successful VCs are very successful in quitting on time or deciding when to double down. This is very, very difficult to implement correctly. And the decision that they use, or the principle they use, are very helpful, both to founders, because you need to decide when to quit. Like, for example, when your glitch is glitchy and it's time to pivot. But also for large companies, when it is time to call the day on the project. So this principle, double down or quit, is maybe one of the most important principles. Let me ask Alex how this principle was applied in Amazon.
So if you think about the double down or quit principle and investing in series, this is exactly what could be easily, it is possible to mimic within the corporate setting. When you double down only on the ideas which are successful after, say, launching a pilot. Here's an example of Prime Now. Prime Now is an ultra-fast delivery app which was launched by Amazon to explore the opportunity to deliver items within 2 hours or even as fast as 1 hour. And when the idea was launched, the idea was to launch it in a single zip code. Why? Because it was extremely important to launch it fast. It was launched eventually in 111 days, which is, I guess, everyone from the corporates would say, wow, because that's an unbelievable pace. Although Jeff Bezos expected this to be delivered within 90 days. Prime Now was launched in New York. The feedback from customers was very positive. Then it's time to go from the seed stage to Series A, then from Series A to Series B. So you can see how within the corporate setting, you can mimic the way that how VCs make decisions. What it helps to preserve capital for successful initiatives, but not just capital, but also management attention and capacity of your team. The worst thing to happen is to keep all of your bets open. And therefore, we have seen so many so-called digital labs or innovation labs full of fancy, cool ideas. But unfortunately, keeping all of them active is a very big, dramatic mistake.
Let me briefly talk about how VC investors make decisions, and then we will go and answer many of your questions. Okay, thank you for submitting so many interesting questions. We'll try to answer as many of them as possible. So in my research, I showed that there are so many different ways venture capitalists make decisions. Some make decisions unanimously, which means that every single partner in a VC partnership has to agree. Others have other methods. For example, they require majority or independent decisions, or they say, you need to convince only one other partner. Is there a difference in outcomes? The answer is yes. VC firms that were less likely to follow the unanimity requirement were more likely to be successful. Alex Rampell, whom I already mentioned once, said something which I believe really firmly when it comes to venture capital. Conviction must beat consensus. He actually continues every single time. And I think conviction exists even if you have to disagree with others. Here's a story, again, that I like. It's a cool story, but it's a typical story. Reid Hoffman, who was then a partner at Greylock, came to his partnership and said, I found this amazing startup where strangers can sleep on the sofa in your living room, okay, and pay you for it. And everybody in the Greylock partnership said, you must be absolutely crazy. We've never heard about a crazy idea. And they said, no, we should not invest. And that would have been the end of the story. But in Greylock partnership, every single partner can make their own decision. So in fact, David Shea, his partner, said, look, every VC needs to have a deal they can fail on. Airbnb can be yours, right? And as you can guess, Reid Hoffman invested, and that became one of the most successful investments ever by Greylock. So I think that is a very important point, is that you have to agree to disagree. And VCs design a lot of shortcuts to agree to disagree in order to find those home runs, those outliers. Here is a story. Imagine a startup. By the way, you see the founder on the left in the center, and on the left and on the right of him, his technical early team. Startup has no clients, no sales. By the way, the startup's name is SaaS-B, like software as a service B. No clients, no sales. Those competing products from established companies in the telecommunications space. Would you ever invest? Well, a couple of investors thought they loved it. Investors from Qualcomm Ventures. Nagraj Kashyap, Patrick Agin, Sachin Deshpande. They said, you know what, they met the founder, they looked at the product, they said, we would love to invest. They went back to their IC, investment committee, and everybody said, that's the end of it, okay? And again, Nagraj Kashyap, the guy who designed Qualcomm Ventures team, created a possibility to invest even if everybody else disagreed. And so he authorized Patrick Agin to look carefully, and Patrick Agin decided to invest on behalf of Qualcomm Ventures. And then when that startup was renamed from SaaS-B to become Zoom, that became, of course, by far the single most amazing investment that Qualcomm Ventures ever done. But again, think about this. What would have happened with the Airbnb investment, the Zoom investment in a large company? In fact, we know what happened. The Zoom founder, Eric Yuan, who is again shown in the middle in the picture, came to Cisco, where he worked, in the WebEx department, and brought out the Zoom idea, and he was turned down by the executives, and therefore he had to leave and start his own company. So Cisco had lost the chance of owning Zoom, that at some point, in fact, was more valuable than the entire Cisco. And I will not go into great details about how different VCs solve this problem, because it's not an obvious one, how they can catch those outliers, but very, very briefly. On the left, we see Venrock partners, two of Venrock partners. Venrock is a venture capital firm. And what they do is they make every single partner make their own individual decision. They actually don't have an investment committee. On the right, we see Nagraj Kashyap, a friend of mine, whom I already mentioned, who, after Qualcomm Ventures, went to set up M12, a venture arm of Microsoft, where he implemented, among other things, anti-veto rule. Anti-veto rule means he could not veto the decision of other players in his team to invest, but he could anti-veto them if they decided not to invest. So he still could decide to invest. And in fact, one of the most successful investments of his, called Kahoot of M12, he had to use this anti-veto rule, okay? And maybe one piece of advice for especially those of you who may have to make decisions in groups in large companies. This is a trick that so many VCs use. Here's an example of Mark Andreessen from Andreessen Horowitz. VCs assign a devil's advocate, which is, in our group, let's say me, Ravi, Alex, I'm going to appoint Alex to be devil's advocate. Alex will have a responsibility to come up with negatives, with weaknesses, why we should not proceed with this. And the idea of this is that it will lead to disagreements. Disagreements are good. It will lead to lack of consensus. It will lead to more information, more discussion, less conformity. And that is good. And this is very not natural for our group communications. So in fact, when we work with teams in large companies, we spend much more time about how exactly we can design all these processes. For example, how exactly you design the devil's advocate process. So if you're in a large company, take this on board. I think this will be very, very helpful. By the way, another piece is that in every single group decision-making, I think juniors should speak first. And experts, amazingly enough, I think should speak last whenever you deal with anything that is new or disrupt. Remember that upper part of the pyramid. Okay, let me stop at this point. We would love to have a chance to answer questions. And in fact, let me start with answering one of the questions. Just give me a second. Moody is asking a question. I pre-ordered the book to receive on May 22nd. Thank you, Mudit. I will be interested to learn about both authors' background, education, cultural before Stanford, and any attempt on their own venture launch and success. So let me provide you my own example how I personally using venture mindset principles, because I believe in personal examples being very powerful. So I've been at Stanford for 20 years, as I mentioned. And of course, I came as a young assistant professor, we call it, assistant professor of finance. Now, what was my single biggest mistake when I was a young professor? And I can tell you, this is the biggest mistake of every professor. We have so many ideas. We have so many exciting projects to work on. I have so many PhD students who work with me. So I start a lot of new projects. And then I find out that many of these projects don't work out. Like, he was a PhD student. I worked with him for 6 months. And then the project is not working out. So what I used to do, well, I used to say, well, you know what? I'm a smart man. Here's a great PhD student. We can do it. We can do it. I'll put more resources into this, maybe more research budget. Maybe I'll put more time. Maybe I'll get another assistant, another PhD student to help us. And that is called the escalation of commitment. And I violated the principle, double down or quit. As a young professor, I think my single biggest mistake was I did not have, I did not know the venture mindset principles before I discovered them. I did not know that I really had to work hard to quit on time. So nowadays, the way I use the venture mindset principles, I start more projects. But because I follow the venture mindset principles myself, I think I now have more successful projects because I can reallocate my effort, my emotional passion, my expertise, etc., but also my students to work on more successful projects. So I think that is maybe I use many principles every day in my personal and professional life, but that is a specific example. Okay, so let's go into some other questions. And Ravi, maybe let me get back to you. While Alex and I are looking at the questions in the Q&A, do you want to ask us a question?
Yes, I do, Professor Ilya and Alex. You obviously have, an exceptional level of insight into the VC world, and I want to know what specific AI trends and technologies are currently influencing venture capital in general, the venture investment strategies and funding decisions.
That is a great question, Ravi. So first of all, AI is definitely playing a big role in the world of investment, okay? Not just because VCs invest in startups, in AI startups, obviously, but in how they make decisions. Let me give you again an example. So a friend of mine called Paul Arnold, he's a founding partner at the VC firm in San Francisco called Switch VC. And he's using his AI secret sauce, okay? What is he doing is, effectively, he is scraping LinkedIn kind of every day, and then trying to identify every single founder who's pursuing a stealth startup. And then he has his own algorithm where the best founders, according to his algorithm, kind of bubble up. And so every single day or whatever, every single 2 days, he basically gets the output of this AI algorithm of between 5 and 20 startup founders, or rather founders of 5 to 20 startups. And then, of course, then he uses his and his team non-AI knowledge, which startups to look at, okay? And I think that is a pretty typical. So many VCs use more and more quantitative data, various AI algorithms, at the beginning of their funnel. So to enrich their funnel, to help them along their funnel. But the final decision so far, I have not seen anybody make with the AI algorithm. At the end of the day, this is still a human decision about people that is very difficult to make with AI. And I don't think that will change in the foreseeable future.
And Ravi, AI trends should be definitely recognized. It's as transformational as mobile used to be or internet used to be. So claiming that you're a non-AI start is a dead end to some extent because it has to be integrated as a part of your business model. like I mentioned, or when you introduced me, in about 6 years ago when I was with AWS AI and ML team, at that time, Gen AI was not yet discussed, but it was so obvious, and I focused on so-called computer vision. It was so obvious to me that this is going to be the future. Therefore, to some extent, we are already experimenting with some kind of built products. So look forward, think about what will come next in terms of the AI technology. What could be built on top of AI? What kind of apps or infrastructure will be needed to enable AI?
So maybe I have a follow-up then. So with all this hype and excitement around AI, what unique criteria should investors apply when accessing or when evaluating the long-term viability and success potential for AI-focused startups?
Ravi, this might sound counterintuitive and deflating in a way. I don't think that VCs apply very different principles when they analyze AI versus other startups. Now, AI right now is a very exciting space. From the point of decision making, it's not a very different space. There's a lot of uncertainty about how AI is going to play out. We don't know. I think what VCs know is that however it's going to play out, there will be very few winners. It's unlikely that there are going to be hundreds of winners, okay? At most, there will be dozens of winners in various niches, but more likely there will be just several big winners. And everything from their reputation to the money they earn will depend on whether they will be able to back those companies. And the principles, therefore, they're very, very similar. Now, there are some differences. And I think one difference is that in many spaces earlier, you could have projected revenue very quickly. With AI, very often it's very difficult to project the state of revenue because the market is so new. And by the way, that did happen in the past as well, okay, in some spaces, but not many others. So again, I will say that AI space is exciting, very new, but from the VC point of view, they've seen that. They've seen this. By the way, this relates to a question asked by Udit. He's asking, what are some of the mistakes to be avoided as a venture capitalist new into this AI space? I would say that the biggest mistake to avoid is what is called FOMO. And I think one of the other questions kind of touches on this as well. FOMO is FOMO, fear of missing out. I've seen too many younger VCs invest just because everybody else is doing so. They're kind of forced to invest. The challenge is, if you're ever tempted to do so, remember Alex Rampell, conviction must beat consensus. And this works both within your partnership, but also generically. So if every single person wants to invest in exactly this opportunity, that's not maybe a good idea, because even if everybody is right, the valuations are going to be so high, you will never be able to get high return. And so it doesn't mean that AI space is huge. So therefore, there's a space for hundreds, if not more, VCs. But you have to have your own niche. Again, think about Samir Gandhi in my example about the prepared mind in Dropbox and file sharing. That was a huge vertical, but he spent time to think about how it's going to work. And so my suggestion in terms of mistakes to avoid is to think about what kind of space, what kind of niche space I'm going to concentrate in AI. So therefore, I don't think that VC is actually investing in AI now. They're investing in specific subspaces in AI where they have their own thesis. So develop a thesis and then follow it, even if as long as you have conviction, even if others think that's not a very interesting space. Okay, other questions?
I think there is a very important and interesting question from Sam. Are there any potential challenges or pitfalls associated with adopting a venture mindset, and how can they be mitigated?
Thank you,
We
Sam.
believe that the number one challenge is that it has to be applied to situations where the uncertainty is high. In ordinary decision-making, say, day-to-day operations or planning your supply chain or making a budget for your business for next year, it is not the time to apply the venture mindset. That's where we call it a traditional mindset, might be a better tool to apply. You do not want to take too many risks. You do not want to experiment that much because to some extent you can predict the future. You have enough information to do so. That's where the venture mindset may not be ideal. Venture mindset is helpful when you face uncertainty, when you do not know what will happen in the future. That's why you make a bet on the team, because you do not know what kind of problems the team would face. The team, what you do know, that the team will face some, and they will have to pivot a lot. That's where the VC mindset excels.
There are two questions that kind of touch on the same topic. So one question is by Girish, is for a smaller firm, focus is critical to success. How do you keep your focus while trying out new ideas? How do you balance great ideation with great execution? Okay. So first of all is that when you are in a large organization, remember this pyramid that we showed earlier on, and I think large organizations have advantage over startups and over small firms. They can afford to use resources. They can afford to view themselves as a portfolio bets. Very often, their problem is that they don't. Now, if you're a startup, you can't afford it. Don't think about core, adjacent, and new. Luckily, if you're trying to raise venture money, you are in this new spot. So therefore, you have to focus. And that, of course, increases the risk right away. So therefore, if you're a small company, if you're a venture-backed company, if you're a founder trying to find angel/VC money, you have to focus. It doesn't mean that you do not need to try new ideas. So again, think about tiny speck, or maybe less dramatically, startups pivot all the time, pivot slightly, depending on, you get your first customer and the customer provided response, and there's a pivot. Let me tell you one story that at some point impressed one of my senior executives I worked with. I worked with the CEO of a very, very large financial institution around the world, and I brought him and his senior leaders to Silicon Valley. And he met, so it's a huge financial institution, hundreds of thousands of people, okay? And I brought him to a software startup, a fintech startup. And the CEO was, looked at this CEO, this startup, met with the founder, was impressed, very interesting idea. And then he asked the CEO, so how often do you come out with a new version? And the CEO said, the founder of the startup said, about 5 times a day. And the CEO of a large financial institution was absolutely flabbergasted, like taken aback, like, he froze. This was a very uncomfortable moment. He didn't know what to say. And then he asked to confirm what's happening. And what happening is that every single time they'll get a customer feedback or a new customer contract, etc., they would change a product. And of course, if you're a large company, you just can't afford to do it, okay? But actually, the CEO succeeded. That CEO succeeded in making these arrangements faster. Okay. Ravi Sithapati is also asking another question. What is your view on patience capital if that is needed for innovations in, say, the utility space? So we had only 1 hour to present our venture mindset, and of course, many principles we didn't present. One of the principles we did not present is in principle number 9, think long term. So in fact, many people think that venture capital is short term. The reality is that venture capital, just by design, is a patience capital. Now, patience doesn't mean maybe 50 years, but patience maybe means 10 to 15 years. So my research shows that an average unicorn takes 7 to 8 years between raising the first venture round and going public. And by the way, patience capital means that even if you exit, there will be more investors. And these days, often not public markets that are relatively short term, but let's say private equity markets, which are also private and also longer term.
Yeah, so great things take time, as we say in the book. And actually, this is also said not just in the book, but by large technology corporations. They expect new ideas to take time. Normally, the timeline that they target is about 5 to 7 years. However, it does not matter that the idea will not generate any user feedback in 5 years. Of course not. Like in the example that we shared before, the feedback should come through immediately with your MVP, minimum viable product, or MLP, minimum lovable product version, so that you can tweak and twist the idea to make it even better product.
Ramu is asking a question that he's doing company in the AI space and building a great AI platform. And now he says that there will be announcements about presumably new companies in the AI space every 10 minutes. There's a lot of PR, etc. Tons of noise. How can we get sure to get our platform surfaced to VCs? So that is an important question, how to ensure that venture capitalists pay attention to you. So, Ramu, remember what I told about the 30 to 60-second pitch. There is a lot of noise. Smart VCs know how to cut through this noise. And they use red flags. So red flags are, the market is large enough, so your space, likely the market is large enough. So therefore, the red flag is clear there. But the biggest point is, are you the right team to execute it? You know, but VCs don't. And they have, VCs in my experience have extremely short attention span, okay? And by the way, this is done by design because they can't afford to spend even 10 minutes on every single startup. So you have to convince them to surface your idea to VCs that you are the right person and that you know something about the space or already achieved something in the space that other players have not. So you have to surprise them positively. And then they would like to talk to you more. And once they would like to talk to you more, then you have to show them, of course, the product, what exactly you're building, what exactly your team is doing, and so on. But this first stuff, this first moment is very, very, very important. Suresh is asking, is Temu disrupting Amazon? Is TikTok disrupting Instagram? How is their business model different, if at all? So a couple of generic points, first of all, Suresh and everybody else, which is, yes, all the startups are not disrupting, but trying to disrupt. I think that's a difference, which is it's normal that whenever you have a leader in the space, there is constantly fight for disruption. By the way, this is why large players have to be very careful in every single industry, not only in tech industries, that they're going to be disrupted. By the way, if they're going to be disrupted, likely they're going to be disrupted by somebody from the outside. And I think the business models of new players is going to be very, very different. Okay? I don't want to comment on Temu and TikTok unless Alex wants to comment specifically. But I think you can really disrupt only if your business model is different. Just if your technology is slightly different, that's not going to work. By the way, Suresh, you mentioned Amazon and Instagram. You didn't mention Google. But obviously, ChatGPT, OpenAI is trying to disrupt Google at the same time. And again, with a very different business model. Siddharth is asking, as some say, money attracts money. Most investors, including VCs, invest only when they see some traction, including on funding, based on my experience. So how do you go about this? I would say this is kind of right. But the way to attract attention of VCs is, in terms of money, is try to raise first from angels. If you're raising first from angels, reputable angels who can later introduce you to VCs, then that is a good first start. And many of my students, for example, who eventually raised very successfully from venture capitalists, started with a relatively small, maybe $500,000, $1 million in Silicon Valley rounds of angel funding. And then through this, they achieved the milestone, and then it was much easier to invest, to get VCs. There is something else. And this was somewhere in our slide that I didn't have time to get to, One of my friends is managing partner of a large venture capital firm in Silicon Valley called, his name is Scott Sandell, and the venture capital firm is NEA. And I love what he says. He tells my students every single year, if you want money from me, he says, you get advice. And if you want advice, you get money. What he's really trying to say is that if you're reaching venture capitalists and say, look, we're raising around, why wouldn't you invest in us? Venture capitalists will be skeptical because they would like to establish a relationship first. If you're raising out and impress them and they say, you know what, we actually just raised angel money, but we would love to get you advice on whatever. You're much more likely to get kind of a reasonable, interested response.
There is a question from Shantanu. Can small entrepreneurs prevent large VCs taking business ideas from them and implement themselves? I hope after this talk, you can see how important the team is for VCs. Because at the end of the day, it will be the team who would implement this idea and make it work. Therefore, actually, many VCs would look at your team first. And that's, by the way, this is the slide that you have to definitely pull from the end of your deck to the beginning of the deck, because that is the asset that VCs would invest in. Think of your business idea of a lot. It's still important, but it's less important than the team that you're bringing to the room and to VCs.
So let me answer the last question. Gaganpreet is asking, when you say VCs focus on the founders and the team, what do you mean exactly? So what I think I mean exactly is that, Gaganpreet, is that in modern times, VCs will not invest in an early stage startup unless they believe that the founding team will be able to execute the deal. Again, ideas are overrated. If you think you have a great idea, it does not mean you will be funded by VCs. Because even if they love the idea, okay, and I don't think they will steal the idea because then they will not execute themselves ever. But they will say, oh, that's a very cool idea, but I actually don't like the team very much. Let's try to find out another team that is doing the same. So that's what exactly I mean when I say that VCs focus on the founders and the team. So
we can continue if you are available to continue. I know you may have a hard stop, Professor Ilya.
I believe that Ilya just have a flight to catch.
Oh, okay.
So that's why we'll have to stop pretty quickly.
That's right. Flight to catch, promoting the venture mindset. So to celebrate the book launch, Alex and I are doing a lot of things to promote. And again, to conclude, Ravi, first of all, thank you again for the invitation. Thank you, everybody. To conclude, I would love to say is that, the reason Alex and I wrote the book is to have an impact beyond my Stanford VC class, beyond Stanford University, and indeed beyond California and America. Especially when I found out how many founders of American unicorns came from outside the United States, including India. So our goal is to make an impact. And therefore, if you were interested in this, if you're surprised by anything that we've said today, if you were fascinated by any of the stories that Alex and I shared, make sure to share the venture mindset, to share this information with your colleagues, with your friends, with your teammates, with your executives in large companies where you work, because I think that the venture mindset is going to be really helpful. And our goal is to launch the venture mindset movement if more people are going to get access to those principles and will follow them.
Thank you. This was wonderful, Professor Ilya and Alex. Thank you so much for sharing your wonderful insights with all of us today. We are very grateful for you to take the time to do this. I've already heard some of the participants are pre-ordering the books, and good luck with the launch. I'm sure it will be a very successful launch, and let me predict, it will be a bestseller. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ravi. Thank you, everybody. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.